Boy, full house on the kids' sermon at both services today. This is one of those Sundays that preachers love. I looked at the lectionary readings for today, and it was hard to pick what to talk about. There's enough there. I could go on talking until 5 or 6 this evening. I promise you I will not. I know some of you have lunch reservations. So I want to focus on one thing. In our gospel lesson, Jesus tells Peter, I give you the keys of the kingdom, the power to bind and the power to loose. And I want to talk about this binding and loosing and what it might be. You know, this has been a problem that has divided Christians for the last 2,000 years. If you know anything at all about Christian history, you know that we've been really good at beating each other up, literally, over what binding and loosing is and who owns that power. I'm not going to jump in the middle of that argument. But I think it is good to think about what this binding and loosing means, and maybe you'll figure out where I land in the argument anyway as we go along. What is Jesus telling Peter and the disciples and us that we have the power to bind or loose? Is it the power to declare what is right and wrong or what is good and evil? I hardly think so, as if we could change the mind of God. That in the church, the best we can usually do is try to discern that which is good and that which is evil, and we get that one wrong on both counts a lot. We just have to sort of sort it out as we muddle through. Likewise, I don't think that it's a power to bind other people, as if we could somehow declare who is in and out and take some people and put them away from God's love. If we know anything from looking at the Gospels, it's that God is constantly in the business of going to whoever we set on the outside and drawing them back in. Even those people whom we had very, very good reasons for putting out there in the first place. So if binding and loosing isn't about being able to say some things are good and some things are bad, or that some people are good and some people are bad, or that some are in and some are out, what is left for us to bind or loose? The answer is ourselves. When we're invited into the kingdom of God, we have a choice of freedom or servitude. And we have choices about what we bind ourselves to and what we let go of. When we're baptized, we bind ourselves to Jesus, but in order to make room for Jesus, we really have to let go of a whole lot of other stuff. Bad habits that draw us away from Jesus, bad habits that separate us one from another. Some of you don't know all the things I've done before I was ordained. One of the ministries I had before ordination was that I used to work with the homeless. And one of the particular ministries I was involved in with the homeless was helping homeless folks find jobs. And we would give classes to our homeless clients to try to help them get jobs. I mean, some of it was practical stuff about how to write a resume, but a lot of it was interior work. And there was an old Baptist minister who was involved in this ministry. And one day while we were teaching, he told our clients a story. He said, imagine I give you a 20-pound sack of potatoes, and I ask you to carry it around with you today. Now, today what you have is a heavy load of 20 pounds of potatoes on your back. Now, since I don't ever come to you and tell you to put it down, let's just imagine that you keep carrying that sack of potatoes day after day after day after day after day. Anybody know what happens to potatoes if you leave them in a sack for a long time? Have you forgotten that bag of potatoes under the kitchen sink like I have sometimes? You stick them in there to get them away, and you find them a few weeks or even months later, right? What happens to potatoes, right? At first, it's not so bad. They just sprout. But then they start to rot. And they start to ooze. And they start to stink. Every one of us, human beings, tends to go through life with that 20-pound sack of potatoes. It's rotting and oozing and stinking. All of the things that it was our job at some point in time to carry, but that we never got around to setting down. The things we have bound ourselves to. Resentments, anger, fears. Sometimes, indeed, it is our job to pick up that 20-pound sack of potatoes. We encounter real injustice and evil in the world, and sometimes we have to say something about it. But then, what? If we don't get around to forgiving, if we don't get around to letting go, it becomes impossible for us to live bound to Jesus, to live bound to each other in Jesus' kingdom, because we're too busy putting something between ourselves and others. When we bind others, even for really good reasons, what we end up tending to do is binding ourselves to that smelly sack of potatoes that makes it so that others don't want to be around us and makes it so that we're not able to love as Jesus wants us to love. We are, each of us, invited into the kingdom and asked to bind ourselves to one thing and one thing only, and that is Jesus himself. This evening at our 5 o'clock Eucharist, a 12-year-old girl named Bailey is going to be baptized and bind herself to Christ and begin a lifelong process of letting loose of all of the stuff that gets in the way of the promises she will make tonight to give her life wholly to Him. As she does that tonight, we are all invited with her to recommit ourselves to the same work of letting go of all the things that separate us from God, all of the things that separate us from each other, all of the things that even separate us from ourselves, from our true selves. That self created in the image and likeness of God, that self created for the singular purpose of love. Jesus has given us, each of us, the power to do the binding and loosing that we need to do to live in the kingdom of God. And Jesus has given us the joyous task of sharing the news of this way of freedom with others. The world needs to know that it doesn't need to carry around the burdens that it creates for itself as it tries to bind others. The way of freedom, the freedom found as children of God, the freedom found when we are living lives without those burdens separating us. That way is open to all. And it is good news on this day that we can, all of us, choose to let go of everything that is not the presence of God in the midst of us, and to make room for all in the kingdom of God.